Today's episode is brought to you by Country Butcher. Since 1979, Country Butcher's goal has been to provide their community with the highest quality meat and meat processing services. Their meat processing services include USDA processing and ranch butchering of pork, beef, lamb, goat, and bison, as well as a variety of types of wild game processing. They also produce an array of products for food services such as restaurants, caterers, and events. And right now, Country Butcher is the best place to go for all of your corned beef needs. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, St. Paddy's Day is right around the corner. I forgot about it, you forgot about it, but our friends at Country Butcher have us covered with great prices on corned beef between now and St. Paddy's Day. Visit their website, countrybutcherca.com, or swing by the shop at 5860 Feather River Boulevard in West Linda. Seriously, folks, this is a local shop. It's a family-owned business. These guys are awesome, and their prices are great. So check them out at countrybutcherca.com. We are also brought to you by Tyler & Co. Marketing, providing top-notch photography and videography services to Northern California. Tyler & Co. is your one-stop shop for social media content, product videos, commercials, promotional videos, and best of all, weddings and events. I dare you to take a quick scroll down their Instagram page at TylerandCo_marketing and tell me it doesn't look like a Hollywood production. If you want people to ask you who the executive producer of your wedding was, call Tyler & Co. If you want it to look like you got paid just to be in your wedding photos, call Tyler & Co. If you want the video of your first dance to look like it qualified you for the Screen Actors Guild, call Tyler & Co. And best of all, your future father-in-law is going to forgive you for everything, when he finds out how much money you're saving him on this wedding by using Tyler & Co. marketing to capture your big day. So visit tylerandcofilms.com for all your photography needs. That's tylerandcofilms.com. I also have a show coming up March 21st at Red Bus Brewing in Folsom, California from 6 to 8:30 p.m. Come on out and bring a friend. Hope to see you there. All right, ladies and gentlemen, today's song is Your Cheatin' Heart by Hank Williams. And when I dug into this song, I learned this is a long story. Like, Hank Williams' life led up to this song in a way that was, it's as tragic as any music story has ever been. So Hank Williams was born in 1923. His name was actually Hiram King Williams. And his life actually starts out extremely similar to Willie Nelson's life. So both of their dads are World War I veterans. But Hank Williams' dad is like injured in World War I and he never really recovers, and he spends like a decade in VA hospitals with, all kinds of ailments and stuff. Like, basically like an even worse case than Willie Nelson's dad. They both end up not in their sons' lives for very long. So Hank Williams, by the time he's 10, he is being raised by his mom. He gets a hold of a guitar and he starts learning from a guy called T-Tot. I think his name is Rufus Payne was his real name, but people called him T-Tot. And T-Tot for Hank Williams, I don't know if, like the song Curtis Lowe, it's a very similar story. Like, I almost wondered if Skynyrd was talking about Hank Williams after I caught this part, but they weren't actually. It's just coincidental. But T-Tot was that guy for Hank Williams. He was just like this old black dude that Hank used to hang out with. He'd bring him food, and T-Tot would teach him how to play the blues. And Hank took that and, kind of built his music career starting from the time he was 10. His mom, her name was Lillie, she was immediately supportive of Hank's music career. She started working as, like, she was booking him gigs, she was handling the money, she was, finding band members and Lillie was as involved as she could possibly be. Especially, Hank started playing for money when he was like 13 or something. And and then Hank was also born with a spinal condition, which ended up playing a gigantic role in his life. So he was born with spinal bifida and like terrible eyesight. And so he is 18 years old when America, when Pearl Harbor happens and America's thrust into World War II. All of his band members start getting drafted, but Hank never gets drafted because he's got these spinal problems and poor eyesight. But he ends up working as like a dock worker for a while or something, but his music career continues. And, but his problem started when he was 11 with a spinal condition, obviously, that's, hurts and he constantly has. Well, he got a hold of moonshine when he was 11, which apparently was pretty common at the time in Alabama. Like, they're, behind other shows and stuff. Like, it was still during Prohibition, so guys would stash their booze, like, in the trees behind events, and Hank and his little buddies would go find it, and they'd all just get hammered on somebody else's moonshine. But that led to some serious problems down the line. So anyway, one of Hank's first real steady paying gigs is he actually got work for what used to be called medicine shows, which medicine shows were kind of like, today you see all the brought to you by Pfizer. It was that, but it was like the snake oil salesman. They had to like gather a crowd so that they could then be like, oh, this will cure your mumps or whatever. And that, whatever, diluted whiskey they were selling to people, or for whatever reason. Well, to draw the crowd that they needed to sell things, they would go out and find talent, and they'd start the show with putting the talent up for free. And then as the crowd built, Hank's show gets done, these guys step up and they start selling all their stuff. And Hank used to get paid to show up and play, and he would get paid commission. So he'd actually help sell whatever, magic ointment they were selling or whatever. And that's where, when Hank was 18 years old, his life starts to get serious. When he's 18, he meets his future wife, Audrey. Now, Audrey Shepard she's just a dynamic person in Hank's life. They met when they were both 18, and at the time, she had a kid from a previous marriage already. And she was little. I think the baby was she was less than a year old when Hank met her. Well, already at the age of 18, Hank had enough of a drinking problem that Audrey was nervous about it and basically told him that she wasn't going to get married to him unless he fixed the drinking problem. And so he ends up staying sober for a whole year to prove that he can pull it off. And that goes okay. They get married. Hank adopts the daughter. I think her name is, it's spelled Lucrezia. They say Lucretia. I'm not exactly sure how she pronounces it, but, we'll say Lucretia, I guess. So he adopts her, and for all intents and purposes, Hank is her dad. That's, you'll see her in interviews later. That's how, she remembers him and how she talks about him. So, but Hank's 18 years old. He's suddenly a husband and a dad, and kind of starting to become a celebrity, sort of. And Audrey was also super ambitious, and she was kind of tough to... So Lillie, Hank's mom, had been working as his manager. She was handling all the money, and Hank got to feeling like he wasn't getting enough of the money, which probably was the case, but it's probably because Audrey was worried that he was just going to drink it all. So she kind of held some of it back. Well, now Audrey shows up, and she's not okay with that. And so the two of them really start to butt heads. Audrey and Lillie have a super contentious relationship. Audrey ends up kind of winning out. And so she becomes Hank's, wife and manager, sort of. So she starts handling a lot of the networking, a lot of the, fee collecting, gig booking, that kind of stuff. So Lillie is kind of, booted from the business picture, which she did not like. But, so Hank and Audrey moved to Nashville in 1946. And you gotta, Hank's whole life happens so fast. So 1946, he and Audrey moved to Nashville. And pretty quickly, so Fred Rose of the Acuff Rose Publishing Company would become a gigantic part of Hank's career. They would write together and produce together. Fred Rose was a huge part of this. And they were actually introduced through Audrey. So Audrey went out and started pounding the pavement and found a connection to Fred Rose. She introduces him to Hank. And initially, Fred Rose was super skeptical of Hank Williams because Fred Rose is a songwriter. He has his own, he's part of the publishing company and he's writing his own songs. Well, he sees Hank's body of work and starts to feel like this guy out of nowhere, because there's no internet. This guy just shows up out of nowhere, and he's got this Rolodex of songs that Fred Rose described as the best collection of songs he'd ever seen written by a single person. And so he was immediately kind of suspicious, So as a test for Hank, Fred Rose says, all right, I'm going to give you, I want you to write a song about X, Y, and Z. Gives him like a homework assignment, basically. And Hank turns around and writes Mansion on the Hill, which was one of his initial, it wasn't like a gigantic breakout success, but it did help put him on the map. And he crunked that out relatively quick just because Fred Rose asked him to. So Fred Rose sees the talent. It's going great. He decides, all right, I'm going to hitch my wagon to this guy. And they start working together really closely for years. Like they end up as a team. And Fred Rose is actually the one that helped Hank get signed at MGM Records, which the momentum is just picking up for Hank's life here. And but 1948, so because he gets signed on with a big record company, the big record companies are kind of particular about who gets to go where and who's performing on what. Up to this point, the other thing about Audrey is that she thought she was a pretty hot ticket herself, and she would often perform with Hank. Like, they'd go to shows all over the place, and she was on stage with Hank, singing, and kind of she liked to insert herself into the musical process. And even Hank at the time did not like that. That was like there were times, even their daughter would say that Hank would just get frustrated and just tell Audrey, like, nope, you're not in on this one. Stand back. I got it. Like, stop. And which Audrey did not like, because she was a very, type A lady. And if you go back and listen to Audrey Williams' voice, people hate on her a lot, but it's not terrible. She's just, she's hitting the notes. She's just missing a little something. I don't know. She's almost universally disliked by Hank's fans at the time. And that bleeds over to the record company, and they basically tell her, no, we're not paying you to go on stage with Hank. Hank's going on tour. He's writing his songs. You stay here. And so Hank being on the road, and by the way, at this point, his alcoholism is back, and he's not sober at this point. He's kind of bouncing around between surgeries and stuff like that. That comes later, but alcoholism was already back, and it was already a problem. So he starts hitting the road, starts playing these gigs, and their marriage starts to spiral almost immediately. And there's already rumors start of Audrey's cheating on Hank, Hank's cheating on Audrey. There's a bunch of just doing rock star stuff on the road. And then on top of that, Hank's alcoholism battle stretched for most of his life. I mean, he started drinking when he was 11. Well, part of how they used to treat alcoholism was first of all, your friends would just send you off to what they called a sanitarium, which is where you just dry out for a while and then, you try again, which obviously did not work. Well, in 1951, we're skipping ahead a little bit, but in 1951, Hank gets tangled up with a doctor named Toby Marshall. And Toby Marshall was the worst thing that ever happened to Hank Williams, because this guy was a straight up con man. Just months before he met Hank, he had been paroled for fraud. He had for practicing medicine without a license or something. It was basically he was in jail for fraud, gets out, immediately orders a medical degree. He paid $50 for it, and he shows up in the mail. And then he proceeds to start prescribing hardcore narcotics to Hank Williams. Somehow Hank meets him, and he kind of becomes Hank's personal drug dealer. This guy is not a doctor at all. He's just pretending. But he's writing. But he also, the drugs that he prescribes to Hank do sort of have a medical application. So it was morphine, which, for pain, and Hank did have a terrible spinal problem. The morphine, from a medical perspective, and this is 1951, morphine kind of makes a little bit of sense. But so he's on morphine. He's on another drug called chloral hydrate, which I don't exactly know what that does. And phenobarbital, which is a barbiturate. And I think it's basically to prevent seizures when you're coming down off the booze. And that combination on its own, theoretically, isn't that dangerous. But you pour a little bit of booze in there, and you're going to have a real problem. So this doctor, Toby Marshall, just starts writing scripts for morphine and phenobarbital and all this other stuff, and just pumping it towards Hank as often as he'll pay for it. And that becomes a gigantic issue. Because Hank, actually before he met Toby Marshall, in I think it was 49. So right after Hank Jr. is born. So Hank Jr. is born in 1949, and the relationship with Audrey and Hank was already super contentious. They actually get divorced in 1948. Like, things just spiral out of control. They get in this gigantic fight. And then in 1948, they get divorced. But then Hank kind of turns it around and starts being sober for a while, and they get the divorce annulled pretty quick. So, but things are obviously not going great. But that 8-month sober streak ends when they go to some social event. It was a wedding or a birthday or something. And friends that were there basically described Hank as the kind of guy that he can't drink. He's either has one drink and he tears everything up, or he's not drinking at all and he's a great guy. And that was Hank Williams. And at this social event, he had a drink and then a bunch of drinks, and then he went home and he tore the house apart and scared Audrey. And so that kind of set him back off onto the wrong foot. And so things are everything between 1949 and 1951 for Hank Williams is a rough ride. I mean, we're in the trenches, kind of paradoxically, because on the recording side of his career, he's doing great. He's firing off hit after hit after hit. He's worth I think I read somewhere that he was worth like $10 million by the time 1951 comes around. And that's a lot of money in 1951. So recording professional side, doing great. Performing side, not so great. He is missing shows. He's drunk on stage. He's having all kinds of issues, which up to then, he'd kind of done a decent job of not allowing that to interfere with his career. So much so that the Grand Ole Opry was nervous about letting him on. Even though he was this gigantic star already, they had an image that they were worried about, and they didn't want to let, some wild Hank Williams just show up and be a drunk idiot on stage, which they were right to worry about. And but Hank goes through this sober spell, and he ends up getting inducted into the Opry, and he's there for a while. But that starts, like I said, as the morphine and everything takes over his life, and he's starting to really spiral, and him and Audrey are just fighting. And by the time it spirals down, he ends up getting fired from the Opry later. But so him and Audrey are back together in I think it's 1951 here. So in 1951, tragedy kind of hits the scene here. 1951, Hank is on a hunting trip, and he just trips and falls. He goes through some kind of a fall accident and re-aggravates his back. And remember, at this point, he'd kind of started to stitch his life back together. Everything wasn't in the dumpster yet. It was tough, but working. And then I think it was the fall of 1951, and he ends up slipping and falling, re-aggravates his back. And after that, so he actually has to have a surgery. He gets a back surgery. And there's audio of Hank because he gets a back surgery, which that's when the morphine really got to going for Hank. He gets this back surgery, and the recovery process, he ends up missing a show. And this is one of the only shows. Hank missed other shows, but this was the first time that he had the wherewithal to go on the radio and apologize. And there's this audio of Hank being like, I really meant to be there. I knew this date was coming before the surgery, and I really wanted to be there, but I'm sorry, I just can't do it. So this is the one example of Hank missing a show for a seemingly legit reason. He didn't just go on a bender and miss the thing. He wanted to be there, he knew where it was, and he just didn't physically have it in him to go, and he apologizes after. And so shortly thereafter in 1951 is when he gets tangled up with Toby Marshall and starts, pumping all kinds of other drugs and stuff. So, things start to spiral here in 1951 to the point where, things between Hank and Audrey have continued to be super contentious. And there's still rumors of her cheating on him cheating on her. They're the most textbook toxic relationship. And it gets to the point where in 1951. Remember, they already got divorced once and then got it annulled. In 1951, they get in a real bad fight, and Hank ends up firing a gun through the door of a room that Audrey is in. And that is the nail in the coffin of their marriage. Rightfully so. Audrey decides, I've had enough of this. They get divorced, and she means it this time. So, and to add to that, I mean, like I said, he fired a gun at her. I mean, some things, you'll read some things will make it sound like, and she kept his kids from him. And it's like, well, he's an alcoholic, drug addict, and a gun enthusiast, apparently. Because, like, that was a real low point for Hank Williams. So, he starts, continuing on his downward trajectory. Soon after, and this is where life comes at Hank really, really, really fast. So, he gets divorced. Within a couple of months, I think he wasn't even technically divorced. They were separated, and he gets another lady pregnant, and her name was Bobby Jett, and she was like a dancer and a secretary, and I don't exactly know how he met her, but so he gets Bobby Jett pregnant, and Hank knows that he got her pregnant, and makes arrangements for the baby. Basically said, because Bobby Jett did not want the baby, and Hank decides, okay, I'll take full custody of the kid, and actually goes through a lot of effort to be like, he's going to take full custody of the kid, and should he die, custody will go to his mom, Lillie. And so they get that all on paper. Hank very quickly, so that relationship ends, and within a couple of months later, Hank is married to a 19-year-old named Billie Jean Jones, and who is, he just met this just drop-dead gorgeous redhead 19-year-old girl and just decided that's the one, and they date for not that long, and they end up getting married. And they actually do 3 wedding ceremonies. They do one that was private, and just like them and, I guess some close family and a preacher, maybe not even that. One private one, and then they did 2 more ceremonies that they sold tickets for, that people could go be, at Hank Williams' wedding. So so I think they got married in October of 1952. So between 51 and then is where he's gotten divorced from Audrey. He gets Bobby Jett pregnant, and then he's married to Billie Jean Jones, Billie Jean Jones in October. So, but that period of months where all that is happening is Hank's career has continued. His recording career has continued to skyrocket. Things are going great. And his performing career has continued to plummet. Because in August of 1952 is when he gets fired from the Opry for missing shows. I don't think he was ever drunk on stage at the Opry, but he did miss a bunch of shows, and they end up firing him. And which was, another big low point on his career. But and then in this period of time, him and Audrey got divorced, but it left a serious mark on him. And this is when he writes, so on a road trip with Billie Jean Jones, he writes Your Cheatin' Heart, which he apparently was just having a conversation with Billie Jean, and they were talking about his ex-wife, and he just said that Audrey had a cheating heart, which, apparently was true. And just, that phrasing, the way he said it, he did the songwriter thing and was like, oh, so he writes this song pretty quick. And some sources say that he dedicated that song. He actually dedicates it to his then fiance, Billie Jean, because they weren't married yet at the time. And, but anyway, so he writes the song about Audrey after a conversation he had with Billie Jean. So in this period of time, in late 1952, Hank goes into the studio and he records Your Cheatin' Heart, which has, now everybody associates that song with Hank. It's a classic song. It's, you look up Hank Williams, it's one of the first runs you run into. And it's easy to imagine Hank Williams, going all over performing this song that's one of his greatest hits, but that's not the case. He wrote this song in August of 1952-ish, and then he gets married in October. Well, yeah, I guess he wrote it somewhere September-ish. And then, so he gets married to Billie Jean in October. And then just a couple of months later, on New Year's Eve of 1953, Hank Williams died in the back seat of his Cadillac on the way to a gig. And he died from an overdose of morphine, phenobarbital, whatever else he was on, and alcohol. Like that, the combo that you're not supposed to do, he was doing, and it caught up to him, and he died on his way to a gig, which was obviously a tragedy, and kind of throws the country music scene into a little bit of chaos. The work had already been done on Your Cheatin' Heart. The song was it was just in post-production. They were working on, like distribution rights, and they were doing all the corporate stuff in the background, but he'd already recorded the song. So when Hank died on New Year's Eve, the song was and I'm sure they rushed production on this. The song comes out like 22 days later, and obviously jumps to the top of the charts and stays there for 6 weeks or something. It stayed number one on the Billboard charts for like 6 weeks, which was nuts at the time. And it's obviously, that was a giant success, but it kind of threw Hank's family life into obviously just plunged them into chaos, because 6 days after he died, so the order of events goes, Hank dies on New Year's Eve. 6 days later, that baby from Bobby Jett from before is born January 6th of 1953. Then, a couple of weeks after that, Your Cheatin' Heart comes out, and, everybody knows about that. But nobody knows about the baby that's born on the 6th. So, as this is happening, remember, Hank had already made the agreement that if he died, custody of that baby would go to Lillie. And there was also something about that Bobby Jett was supposed to keep the baby for 2 years or something, but I don't think she ends up doing that. I think she ends up going straight to Lillie. And you can imagine all the chaos that causes. Like, Audrey wants nothing to do with this. Lily's already heartbroken because her son just died a week ago, and now she's got this baby. And, within a year, Lillie dies, which is a huge problem for the baby, because the custody it's supposed to go to Hank's sister, but Hank's sister doesn't want anything to do with that baby, and she ends up putting her up for adoption. And so she gets put up for adoption and, goes off and has a little bit of a tragic beginning. I think she ended up with like 4 different families within like a year or something. Like she ends up getting placed and goes off and has her own life. Now, during this time, Hank Jr., who was only a few years older than that baby, I think Hank was like 5. So he was born in 1949, and Hank died at the end. So Hank was like 3, because his dad died, New Year's Eve of 1952. So Hank Williams Jr. goes on to have a pretty stellar career of his own. And people all the time, like, you see this with, different legendary songwriters and singers. Their children will go on to have careers in the same space, and they're usually pretty good, but their parents' legacy has helped them a lot. Hank Jr., I would argue, is not that way at all. Like, his dad's legacy helped him get started, but that dude is as talented as it gets, and he goes on to have his own debaucherous career, but talent was not the question. That dude, he would have made it on his own, I am very confident. So that's Hank Williams Jr.'s life happening up through the 80s. And, it's full of chaos and same thing, drugs and alcohol and, all kinds of excitement. And then sometime in the 70s, so I think it would have been the 70s, the baby from Bobby Jett, she turns 21, and her parents gave her, there's like a $2,000 check and it came somehow from I don't exactly understand where the $2,000 came from, but it tipped her off that she might be Hank Williams's daughter. And so she proceeds to just pour her attention into figuring out if that's true. Now, because that would make her worth a lot of money. And so she ends up, sniffing down that trail, and it takes her a long time. I mean, so it ends up with like a 9-year court battle, but she ends up with this attorney who she later marries. But this new hotshot attorney comes on the scene and somehow finds like written confirmation that she is Hank's kid. Because at this point, Hank Williams Jr., who was the only living heir to the, to the Williams, dynasty, he's fighting her in court all day long. Well, somehow this new attorney finds some written proof that she's Hank's daughter. And in 1985, she's awarded half of Hank Williams' estate, which obviously was, great for her, but Hank Williams Jr. was not happy about that. And because she kind of came out of nowhere 20 years later, but, she's one of Hank Williams' surviving heirs, and her name, and she takes the stage name Jet Williams, which, now this is where things get a little bit weird for her. Now this is kind of, we're way beyond, Your Cheatin' Heart, which is our song of the day. We're into extracurriculars here, but that is an example of a lady who she doesn't seem to have been musically inclined before she found out that she was Hank Williams' daughter. Once she finds out, she picks up the guitar and she starts getting, kind of trying to tap into that. And she owns, apparently, not, after the court case is settled, she owns half that estate. So she has the right to, use those songs for stuff. And she proceeds to strike up a music career. And she's recording a lot of Hank's old stuff. And I think she has some of her own stuff in there, but like most of the stuff you find, it's stuff that Hank Williams did. And again, we're kind of back into Audrey land here, where it's like, it rubs a lot of people the wrong way, but, hey, I guess, it's her stuff. She can do what she wants. But so this random person just came out of nowhere on Hank Williams Jr. and ended up with half his estate from his perspective. So that caused a lot of issues. But, kind of a tragic family story when you think about it. But yeah, Hank Williams, his impact is still all over the place. As far as music today goes, he's still one of the pillars of popular culture. And that song, Your Cheatin' Heart, was the crescendo at the end of a very tragic life. And because the music industry just chewed that dude up and spat him out. He was 29 when he died, I think. So that's our song of the day. Thank you guys for watching, and don't forget to come see my show. I'm at the Red Bus Brewing in Folsom on the 21st. So thank you all for watching. See you next time.